My whole life, I wanted to be a dad. I remember as far back as high school. And when my wife and I started to try to have kids, we discovered that I couldn't be a biological dad. And it was crushing. And this is 11 years ago now. And I realized that I had to change my mindset about something as foundational as what it meant to be a father. And 11 years later, I have two boys and they're the light of my life. So I have obviously done it. And it made me realize that if I can change my mindset about something as foundational as what fatherhood is, I can help people transform their mindset about anything.
Welcome to the Dad Bod, a podcast that tells the story of what it means to be a dad today, one dad at a time. My name is Sean, and I'm a dad living in New York City with my wife and our two young native New Yorkers. The formula for the Dad Bod is simple. Each episode, we're going to interview one dad to get his story of being a dad. Over time, all of these stories will start to create the bigger story of what it means to be a dad today. Thank you very much to everyone for tuning in. If you love what you're hearing, please support the show by giving us a 5-star review and hitting subscribe to stay up to date on all things Dad Bod. But most of all, tell others about the Dad Bod, because these meaningful conversations about fatherhood are a great way to having meaningful conversation of your own with someone that you care about. People often ask how I find the guests for the show. To begin with, there's an intentionality to it. The goal is to have one dad per month. But besides that, I've let my gut and my heart guide me with unplanned inspirations, referrals from the Dad Bod dads, and opportunities presenting themselves. In other words, there is no plan, other than to be ready to receive each dad's story. If there's a dad in your life who you would love to see on the show, email me at sean@thedadbodpod.com. I would love to hear from you. So the voice you heard at the beginning of the show belongs to my new friend and fellow dad, Jeff. Jeff is the creator of Ambitious Dads, a program designed to help dads thrive in all spheres of life through a lens that views personal and professional life as integrated rather than separate. In many respects, the idea for Ambitious Dads came to Jeff through his 25-year career as an executive coach, and more broadly speaking, as someone who has a lifelong passion for teaching and personal growth. Transform your mindset. Make the impossible goal your truth. These are the words at the top of Jeff's website. Yes, it's a message to executives and dads seeking to level up, but as you're about to hear, it's also the story of Jeff's own personal journey to fatherhood. All right, enough talking now. I'm grateful to be sharing this conversation with you. Jeff, Ambitious Dad. Introduce yourself. Tell me your name, your age, how long you've been married, how many kids you have, their genders and ages, what you do for a living, as well as any other hats that you wear or commitments that you keep that are worth mentioning.
Sure. So, first of all, thank you for having me. My name is Jeff Hittner. I am in my 40s. I have two beautiful boys. They are 5 and 8 years old. I do for work what I do for like my life. I call it, I'm an ambitious dad, and I build programs for fathers that really want to get the support that they need to be the types of dads that they want to be in the world. We can call them modern dads. We don't have a lot of role models for the types of dads we want to be, where the idea of provider has changed. It's not that we want to just make money for the family. We want to nurture. We want to connect. We want to be engaged and present. And we really haven't been trained how to do that. It doesn't necessarily come naturally in all those areas. And I've gotten really curious on that because my paid work is I'm a leadership expert and an executive coach. And I noticed a couple of years ago that the fathers that I were coaching, and they were CEOs and senior executives, they had no problem talking to me about their career goals and ambitions. And when I pivoted and asked the same question about like as a father and as a parent, they didn't know how to answer that question. It just got me really curious. And so I decided to investigate, and I kind of declared my ignorance and went on to say, I'm going to interview 50 ambitious dads and just ask them an hour's worth of questions to really understand what sort of gaps and challenges and needs exist. And there's a lot of them. We have a lot of challenges when it comes to our confidence. We have a lot of challenges when it comes to finding community. We have a lot of challenges when it comes to our own emotional regulation. There's so many areas. And so I have started to build that into my full-time business, helping dads, be better executives all at the same time. So I also live in Spain. Our youngest was born during the worst of the lockdown in New York City during the pandemic. And we wanted a very different experience, and the opportunity was creatively presented to us by our next door neighbors in New York, who they were from Spain and they were moving back, and they suggested we come, and we thought we would be here for a year, and it's been 4.5. And it's because family life here is very different. It's easier. Like
Mm,
there's more space to breathe. There's not this hustle mentality day in and day out. Your healthcare is not connected to your work. The other day, I left my kids. The 5-year-old wanted to play on the playground, and the 8-year-old wanted to come home when I was picking them up on the school bus. And so I told the 5-year-old, "You can play here, and I'm going to take your brother home, and I'll come pick you up in 30 minutes." Like I wouldn't do that stateside. Um,
right.
and I'm not saying it's unsafe. I'm just saying like that's not how you're trained to think, right?
Right.
Like that nothing's safe. School day is 9 to 5, not 9 to 2. So you can actually like have a work day and a school day that are aligned, and extracurriculars are built into the school day, and all these little things that actually add up to making parenting just a little bit easier, because parenting's hard.
I also want to prompt you to plug your own podcast that you just
Oh
started
yeah.
as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
So tell me about
Thank
that
you.
podcast.
I launched the Ambitious Dads podcast, and that's really around this topic of bringing in dads to discuss these gaps. Not only that they're there, but like the vulnerability of being a dad, right? Like these are things I need help with. There's this statistic that I love. 92% of men that are fathers identify first as fathers, which is like very significant. And then only 30% of dads think they're doing a good job at it. So you have this huge gap of confidence. And how we handle like confidence gaps as men is not very healthy, right? There's all
Mm,
sorts of ways that we do it in poor form. And like we're not having enough conversations about that. And we're also trying to like wing it all the time. So having conversations about not with like the expert that is telling you the best way to be, but with dads that are like, here's what I'm going through right now. And then connecting it back to the research that I've been doing. That's kind of the vision for the podcast. Yeah.
that's awesome. Tons of overlap with what we're doing with the dad bod. And so I wanted to ask a little bit more about this experience in Spain and what you referred to. And just for context, I presume you grew up stateside. Where did you grow up
Yeah.
exactly?
Yeah. I grew up in Boston and spent 20 years in New York before we moved here. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So you were in, especially New York, in the pinnacle of American mindset in a way, in that hustle
Yeah.
mindset, in that pressure
Yeah.
cooker is the normal pressure
Yeah.
environment. What
Yep.
was that
We
like for you moving to
never,
Spain? Were you like, I don't get this. How are people
well,
doing this?
I didn't realize you had to kind of decompress from it. So it took a couple months, and then after a couple months, I was like, wow, I didn't realize how much of that culture became internalized in me. And I was talking about it today with another dad about how living here gives me space, and that space is like such an important part of human development. We are maxed out, right? That's just the number one challenge that dads have when I've in the 200 that I've interviewed is what you call like work life balance. But it's not just work life. It's like I got to figure out how to be great at my job because I'm ambitious. I got to figure out how to be a great dad. I got to figure out how to be a great partner. I got to figure out how to take care of my own health. Oh, do I have time for hobbies? Like not even that on top of it, right? All of that stuff. And what I love about being here, which I discovered, is like you just have this space where like it's quiet for, I don't have calls all day every day. I can invent the work that I've invented around ambitious dads and still have my other business growing that's less about fatherhood and more just directly leadership and executive coaching. And I think that's so important to be able to pause and reflect, especially if we want to become better fathers, better mothers, if we want to be able to ask the questions about who we really want to be in the world, which is so important at every stage of our lives. Parenthood goes through the same sort of existential crises that teenage life does and early 20s life does. It just comes with a lot more debt and stress and responsibility, right? And it's a pressure cooker. Yeah. So any little bit of added space is wonderful.
Yeah, that reminds me, one of the things that I said in introducing the dad bod with the first episode back a year and a half ago was to say you have all these things. You're trying to improve your health, you're working on your career, your friendships matter, your marriage matters. And then you become a dad. Well, all those problems didn't just go away when you became
Yeah.
a dad. They're still there. You want to be the best dad you can be and the best man you can be, but you're just one guy.
Yeah.
So now, specific to the topic of space, relocating to Spain has helped you to have an appreciation for what that space can mean to a dad in this moment in life. But I imagine you've got a lot of clients, maybe the majority of your clients who are still here in the context of New York, in America. What's some of the advice or what are some of the things that you've seen work for people who are still here in this context, not in a society that's as naturally supportive of that type of space?
Well, it's what I based this 12-week program that I built called the Founding Fathers program. And it's this idea of like we create strategic plans at work. We have a vision statement, we have goals. Why don't we have that around fatherhood? And so this program that I just ran 25 dads through was about what is my fatherhood philosophy? Like, how do I create a fatherhood philosophy? Which is starts with understanding values and understanding my family's strengths and understanding what my role is as a dad for my kids as they're at different ages. And it includes how to build traditions for your family, how to think about questions like success, money, not just for you, but also for you, but for your kids, like how you're going to really consider that education for them. And also co-parenting. Co-parenting is so hard, especially when now, like we as dads, a lot of us, particularly I think the ones that would listen to this, want to play an equal role in how we raise our kids. And that's two people with distinct ways of child rearing and no one teaching them how to like talk about these differences. So there's so much that needs to be evaluated and discussed. And so I built this program, Founding Fathers. It's a virtual program to focus on that. And it was really wonderful. It went great. So we're launching another one. And I take pieces of that and apply that to the leaders that I work with in the US and not just with dads when it's regular coaching work, it's with moms too. I
Yeah.
work with a lot of CEOs that are mothers. And then the next piece is what I call the integration. So too many of us, and I think I heard you say it a little too, right? We're like, this is my job, and then this is my family. And we have, again, so little spare time. Wouldn't it be great if we can feel like one person integrated between who we are at work and who we are at home? And how do we make that happen? Right. And there are ways to make it happen. There's ways to have what I call a personal leadership philosophy that extends from work to home. So it's like you express the same values through the same questions, through the same commitments in both areas, and it overlaps beautifully. And it's about, okay, at work, if I'm a manager of people, how do I ensure that people become their best selves? So how do I set really high standards, but how do I also show my heartfelt commitment to them? Well, that also applies at home. You want to show deep love to your children at home, but you also want to set standards so that they can become their best selves. And so it's a lot of these leadership tools that I'm applying across the spectrum. So it's doing the opposite of having double the work, which requires double the energy and being two different people, but being one person. And so that's what I'm trying to really look at.
I guess for you and this whole vision behind Ambitious Dads, you told, I think, at least one kind of origin anecdote when you mentioned talking to executives and them being very good at defining what they wanted in their life as an executive. And then when you would talk to them about fatherhood, they were somewhat clueless or aimless. And so that was maybe an origin story for the Ambitious Dads project. But I'm curious for yourself, what was your journey to getting to that
Yeah.
realization? When did you start to realize some of these things like being integrated, having goals?
The truth is, because I didn't mention this up front. So my whole life, I wanted to be a dad. I remember as far back as high school. And when my wife and I started to try to have kids, we discovered that I couldn't be a biological dad. And it was crushing. And this is 11 years ago now. And I realized that I had to change my mindset about something as foundational as what it meant to be a father. And 11 years later, I have two boys and they're the light of my life. So I have obviously done it. And it made me realize that if I can change my mindset about something as foundational as what fatherhood is, I can help people transform their mindset about anything. And so the fact that being a dad is the most, it came about in such an intentional way, like wasn't an accident or wasn't easy. It was like, I believe the things that we are most passionate about are often the things that come the hardest. It's what I wanted the most, and it was the most difficult thing to achieve. And so that coupled with the experience of the coaching is what drives me to do this work because it feels like truly meaningful and that something like these boys which light me up every day, this adds to it. This is even more like the beautiful outcome of this big surprise when we started to try to have a family. And it's incredibly purposeful and meaningful to me. And the irony is infertility is almost as common. It's creeping up on 50% of it being men. It's not quite there yet. But it's also like everything else not talked about by men. And so that's the other big origin story for this
Yeah,
work for me.
ton
And
of sense.
then realizing, shit, I'm not like naturally good at this just because I love it. Right. So that's like the
Right.
next piece. So the next piece was like, my boys, they love their temper tantrums. I mean, we've evolved out of them, but I just remember being like, at first it was like, okay, I could stay with them for 30 seconds or a minute, but we were talking 5, 10, 15, 30-minute temper tantrums. I was losing it, and I did not know how to emotionally regulate myself in the context of this. And I started seeing this mirror in the boys in terms of how they were reacting based on like how I was dysregulated when I was getting upset. And that was killing me. And I knew I needed to get some support for that. And so I started doing some research and I started talking to people, and it's been a long evolution. And I'm proud to say like I can sit through any temper tantrum now. They're not having them, that's the irony. Like, now they're at a certain age where they're not having them, but it's this reality that our children spark in us all the emotional issues that we haven't figured out yet from our childhood, all the skills that we haven't developed emotionally, which in most cases men have less developed emotional skills around these sorts of things. It was that too. It was like, I want to be better at this. How do I start to figure this out? And I started having conversations. It might have even started with a roundabout conversation, which is like, I have two boys, so they fight. And I'm like, is this okay? Like they fight a lot. And I kept being like, I'm failing. They're like fighting a lot. And I just started finally asking some friends that I knew had boy siblings. And they're like, no, dude, we fought all the time as kids and we're great adult friends. Like we're super close. It was just like that. It was like, why didn't I just ask that question the
Mhm.
first time? Why did I wait like months and months for this feeling of inadequacy as a dad? And so every interview, as I'm sure is the case with you, whether it's for my podcast or just interviewing them for the work I was doing, was like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. I'm not alone. Oh, thank
Yeah.
God. Right. So
Yeah.
that's a big piece too.
For sure, these conversations, it's a neat thing for me because to create something that I think is good, I get to just be selfish and just ask the questions that I really care
Yes.
about. Basically, trying to say, understand how a person has made a change of mind or change of habit. These are really hard things. And so I wanted to ask you to give me some detail on how you went through that change in mindset about fatherhood. What helped you through it? Who helped you through it? How did you go about that? Because I feel like so much of when you want to make an improvement, you have, it sounds corny and cliche, but it kind of starts on the inside. Like you have to conceptualize or be able to kind of wrap your arms around it in some way. And it sounds like you had to go through some kind of process because the ball was in one place since you dreamed of becoming a father and then it moved very suddenly on you. How did you wrap your mind around that?
About a couple of years ago, I started telling people that my superpower is asking for help. And I knew that I was not going to figure out how to get through this without help. I definitely had a therapist, which was a big help, but I also I remember finding these fertility or infertility websites, and then I could barely find any men on there. And so I was doing I ended up having back at the time it was like Skype calls with like another dad that was going through the same situation, and he was in the UK, and then like another one that was in New Jersey, and I was in New York, and just seeking out people to support and feel understood, and then also have a therapist, and then also do couples therapy. It was all part of like healing and growing, because there's a whole loss process when you go through that. Just like when, God forbid, a couple goes through miscarriage, like there, you got to go through the grief. You had this vision or dream of what either this child, and if it's a miscarriage, or for me, like what it would be to like have kids that shared my blood. And you have to go through that process in order to get to the other side. And I wanted to get to the other side. So that was the other key. I know how to ask for help, and I knew that I wanted to be a dad. And so I knew I was going to get there. I just didn't know how or how long. And it took a lot of crying. It took a lot of sadness. I will always remember when the doctor told us, and I remember it so vividly for how different my wife and my reaction were. She immediately broke into tears. I was like numb. I needed some time. And yeah, and I got there.
This ability to ask for help and just ability to, change. I think clearly that seems to be a core component of your work as a coach, both for executives as well as for dads. Where did you get that? Has it been something you've had for a long time?
Yes. And I think it comes from being a gymnast. So I was a gymnast for 15 years, all the way through college. And you need a coach in gymnastics, and you need to understand how to improve, and you need to like analyze film, and you need to get peer coaching, and you need to tell the coach like, I'm too scared to try this trick, I need you to help me. And you need to be pushed outside. You're like constantly pushed outside your comfort zone in certain sports. And all of that I think contributed to my ability to get good at asking for help. And not a lot of I don't have a lot of shame in asking for
Hmm.
help. I feel like, as I've just been saying, like it's the opposite. It takes more courage to ask for help. So we should be proud when we have to ask, and we do succeed in asking, because that's the more courageous option. And if you want to talk about manly, well,
Right.
asking for help is more manly because it's courageous.
I was looking at your site and your coaching philosophy. One of the things that was emphasized is, and I'm going to butcher it, I apologize, but basically, coaching is about the future, and coaching is not therapy. Therapy is about the past and wrestling with the past. So I wanted to have you, because you're an expert coach and you've been through therapy and you've benefited from it and you've gone through some tremendous change yourself, in part because of or through therapy. How do you how clean is that kind of separation
Not
between?
very, not very
Okay,
clean.
okay,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
yeah. Tell
it's not
like,
very clean. I think it
yeah,
depends on the client,
yeah,
but the idea is we're not starting, like if you're in therapy, you're starting with where some of these wounds come from. What's beautiful about being a parent is whenever you have an overcharged reaction to a situation, that's a trigger. And what that means is that's connecting to something that's not related to your child. That's connecting to something about like how you were brought up or how you were treated, right? And what you did or didn't have, or all of those things. And so there's so much power in exploring that. And so with therapy, I explore that very deeply and understand, where my inability to be able to sit with my son going through a tantrum comes from. Because there's a lot of feelings that bubble up for any of us dads. Just pick the situation where you lose control because your kid is doing X. They're not listening or they're overly emotional. And it's like, is it really their fault that they're not listening? They're four. They're not supposed to be. They're supposed to be focused on X. But maybe it makes us feel unheard, or it connects back to when like our family wasn't really engaging with us, or just a whole host of things. And so it's like learning that stuff. That's the power of therapy in so many respects. And if we ever want to help and change our children's development, we first have to work on us, because they're getting their baggage through our baggage, right? And
absolutely.
so that's where, if you want to be a great dad, again, like the courage is then to look inward. It can be scary. It can make you feel really vulnerable. And that's a beautiful thing, I think. It's a wonderful thing. And then coaching, on the other hand, is like, as I said, also like with the Founding Fathers program, it's you need to have a vision too. Like what kind of dad do you want to be? What is your philosophy for how you want to parent? I tell my kids at different stages of their life, this is my job as a dad. So when they were youngest, I'm like, my job as a dad is to keep you safe, right?
Mm,
So when they were doing stuff that I didn't want, and I was like, don't do that, and they'd be like, come on, and I was like, what's my number one job? To
mm.
keep us safe, Dad. Exactly.
Yeah.
And it cut off the argument, right? Like that's
Mm.
that the argument, it was great. And then, but as they get older, my number one role changes. So
Mm.
I've evolved it. So now like they're 5 and 8, and I'm like, my number one job is to help you learn and develop. And so I don't want to do X. What's my number one job? To help us grow. Okay, so what am I asking you here? Okay, fine. Or like still no, but the argument ends because
Right.
they understand. And so that's just a piece of like your fatherhood philosophy, is understanding what your role is at different times, understanding how you want to be in front of your kids at those different times. And that's the forward looking stuff. And
Yeah.
then the backward looking stuff are the triggers and the traumas, and in theory and potentially with therapy.
Yeah. So I'm gonna put you in the role of therapist for a second, and
Okay.
the patient is not me. The patient is dads more broadly, and this desire to do great in all spheres of life. What do you see as the thing that is keeping dads, the top one or two things that are keeping dads from getting there?
I think there's more than one or two, but one, definitely culture is a piece of it. And that's in part our own creation and in part not. But I think it's again, there's like it's like the work-life balance. Like we have no space, but we want to be different. And so then the second piece is we don't have role models. Like what other dads can I talk to that have figured this out and that I feel comfortable having this conversation about, right? And then we have this confidence gap. If we don't feel confident and we feel like all this vulnerability, that shuts a lot of us down. Not just role models, but we don't have like a group that we come together with and have really amazing conversations with to talk through these things. The other piece is like emotional. We don't know how to deal with our emotions. And it's a space where women are more comfortable having conversation with one another about it and experiencing their emotions and acknowledging them and working through them. And again, it's another space where we're not as comfortable. So I think
Yeah.
there's all of these things. And I think if there's people that are listening, they're listening because they want to be better. Like that's the first step. I don't think there was necessarily that much curiosity about it maybe a generation ago. And again, that might have been cultural, and maybe that's not true for your dad or someone else's dad. But generally speaking, like we had one role, which was like the economic provider, right? And now there are many families where both parents work, right? In fact, the percentage of moms that are back to close to full time by the time the child is 6 is close to 70%, right? Which creates a very different family dynamic. And so we need to develop a whole new set of skills for how we co-parent, how we have the confidence to be a dad. And by the way, having the confidence and failing are not mutually exclusive. So I feel so much more confident and I still fail all the time. I mean, I
Mm.
walk into blow ups between my two boys where it's like, I just know there is no way I am coming out of this with both or either happy. And I'm so annoyed because I've probably just patted myself on the back to be like, oh, the boys are doing so well right now. And then it's like, oh yeah, that's literally an impossible situation. It's
Yeah.
like, and that happens a lot. And how do we recover from that? Right. Like, and to be able to recover. So in my programs, in the Founding Fathers program in particular, a lot of these dads just want to be able to talk about that. I had one dad, my favorite thing was like he has a baby and his baby fell off the couch, right? He's finally starting to move. And these other dads, they almost clap. They're like, welcome to the club, right? And he was feeling like the worst dad in the world. Like, I let my 7 month old fall off the couch. And we're all like, dude, we've all done that,
Yeah.
right? And I mean, not everyone, but I definitely had like, and so everyone was just telling their story about that. That changes us. That little thing isn't about how to be a better dad. It's about like we're all going through this. And
Yeah.
that is so important. And that is a big piece of this change.
Yeah. No, I think so many things you just said resonate with me. That presumption we have about confidence and failure and the relationship between them being mutually exclusive. And I appreciate that you put out there it's not. They're not mutually. You can be in a odd way, the more confident you are, the more comfortable you are with failure, the more accepting you are with failure. And that's definitely something in my own experience. I've seen, unfortunately, as you mentioned, the mirror, you see your kids and they're mirroring to you really how you are. And the realization is a very humbling process
Yeah.
where you're like, why are you doing that? And then you're like, because that's what I do.
Yeah. It's
And
humbling.
that is really like, oh man, and I think failure is one of them, that I think we all have to deal with. Everybody has to deal with failure. They do it well or do it healthy or they do it in sort of more just just habitual ways. And so I know for myself, trying to deal with failure, my own failure more gracefully. I hope that's one thing that I want to model it really well for my kids. I don't want them to see like, oh, when something doesn't go well, this is how daddy deals with it.
Yeah.
That's how and they're not saying that to themselves, but they're
No, of course
doing
not.
it. They're doing it. They're doing it the way that you showed them is supposed to be done. So I especially appreciate that. And you use the word, shutting down. That's something that I've, been identifying in myself a lot lately. I've been starting to develop a habit of journaling in the mornings when it's
Great.
quiet, and that's been really good. The writing prompt for me in the journaling is be honest. That's my only thing because I think that that for me in particular is tough sometimes to just actually, what are you feeling? I said, I don't know. I'll tell you in a couple days. I don't know. I'm just trying to move. I'm just trying to move the chains down the field. That's how I'm thinking of things. And so in the journaling, it's helped me to understand a lot of this more about myself and how some of these things that I'm uncovering through this. So I'm curious to know some of your personal habits. Like, what are some of the things that you do that are in your personal toolkit?
Journaling is one, and something specific I call gains versus gaps. So often we have this like idealized view of where we want to get to, and we measure ourselves against that, and that's the gap, right? And that's really not helpful. But what we don't spend a lot of time doing is measuring our wins and going, all right, over the last, say, 6 months, like since January 1st, like what are the 5 ways I've grown as a dad? Like, what are the 5 things I've learned, or what are my 5 greatest experiences with my boys that created like the deepest connection, right? If we write that stuff down, oh, and then you reread it, by the way, then
Mm,
that's part of your journaling activity is rereading that like almost
mm,
every day. That changes the wiring in your brain. It's like, oh, like I am moving forward. I am growing, right? And so that's a resilience activity. And that's one of my favorite ones. And you can do it about anything. You do it about work, about fathering, you can do it about both combined. And I totally stole the concept. It's a coaching concept and it's called gains versus gaps. Yeah.
That's I've now that you mentioned, I have experienced that where I'm not even intentionally. I keep my journal in a Google Doc, and so just in the process of scrolling, to the end, I come across something catches my eye from something I wrote, 6 weeks ago. And I'm like, wow, yeah, I remember being in that place. We've moved. There's been some deep progress here. I did also want to ask you to understand more about your upbringing and in particular the imprint that your mom and your dad have left on you.
Yeah, both my parents were in my life. I don't believe I had any what they call trauma with a capital T. But there were things that I needed that I didn't necessarily get around like a deep sort of intimacy and physical connection. And every child is different, but like I just really always wanted to be hugged more. I was given a lot of independence, and sometimes that's good and sometimes that's not. So I remember being super curious about religion and my mom looking up like, okay, if you want to go to special like religious school, here are the days of the week, and you have to go these 2 days a week. And she was like, but it conflicts with gymnastics. So like you have to decide. So I'm a kid. So that decision's easy. Like it's gymnastics, right? But looking back on it now, like I wish she made the decision and made a different decision. Like I said, no big traumas, but as a parent now, like the things that I do differently, I would say are I'm hugging my kids all the time. I sleep with them. I just love like putting my boys to sleep. And I don't mind, like even at 8 and obviously at 5, like that they fall asleep with us, that's great. And we can move them into their own beds and giving them that feeling of safety and connection is really what I am driven by.
One of the questions that I ask a lot of the dads, and I definitely want to ask you, is how's your dad bod?
I tell people I work out twice a week at a gym and I don't do it so I can look fit. I do it so I can wrestle on the bed with my boys. And we wrestle on the bed. They love to be physical and we wrestle on the bed a lot. So I'm doing pretty well. I also now live in a city that is a beach city. So like there's a little bit additional external pressure to like not have too bad of a dad bod. And I'm also a bit of an older dad because it took so long to start our family, and I really don't want injury or age to affect the way that I can engage with my boys. And so that's a motivator for me. So ironically, like I said, it's like, is it revolve around my own health? Not directly, although indirectly, right? It's about
Right.
like being a dad.
I'm gonna put you on the spot. You know, you were a competitive gymnast. I look at gymnasts, I'm like, they are incredible. Just the physique, what they're able to do with their body is like what superheroes do. So take me to kind of your highlight film from your gymnastics career.
Well, I ended up I was the captain at William and Mary, which was a Division One NCAA team. I was a captain for 2 years. My best event was rings.
Rings
Uh,
look so cool.
it was definitely a strength event, yeah, for sure. But at the same time, I missed out on a lot of things in my youth because I was very focused on gymnastics, and in part that's what led me to always since then look for space so I can always reflect more. I didn't reflect as nearly as much when I was young. And so there's learning kind of on both sides of the equation of being an elite athlete, like what you gave up, what you sacrificed, and what you got. Yeah.
So how are you applying that with your boys?
We don't do any elite sports. It's a good question. How am I applying? I've actually been thinking a lot lately about body awareness and noticing like that my 8-year-old, I want him to have more and like what's the best way to approach it. So this is how things sort of evolve for me as a dad. I'm like, what's missing right now? Like, what do I think this child needs? Oh yeah, like a little bit more aware. Like I noticed for a while I had to ask, like, how do you feel this morning? And he would say, fine. I'm like, okay, stop. Like, how is your throat? How are your ears? How's your stomach? And he would be like, oh yeah, I guess my throat hurts a little bit. And it wasn't that he was lying. It was like literally, you are not self-aware as a child. And so you have to understand that as the parent and figure out ways to develop that self-awareness. Sports is a great way. Of course, they play soccer here because it's Spain. We've done some rock climbing in a gym, which they seem to like a lot too, and also yoga and surfing. They do a lot of fun things.
Well, just to close out with a thought-provoking question to make most of our audience jealous of your life and where you're at right now. How often do you go to the beach?
It's part of my morning routine. So 3 or 4 mornings a week. That's where I do my journaling on a good day. And it's a 15, 20-minute bike ride to the beach. And then I walk on the beach. So I'm like, all right, I'm getting some. This isn't the same as like going to the gym, but it's like in addition to. So it makes me feel good about that as well. Yeah.
That is awesome. Well, Jeff, thank you very much. This has been a really fun, and I've just learned a ton and appreciation for the work that you're doing through Ambitious Dads and through your executive coaching as well. And I'm glad that we got connected. This has been awesome for me.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Okay, dad number 20 of the Dad Bod is in the books. Big thanks to Jeff for joining me and sharing his story. Check out the show notes or thedadbodpod.com for links to Jeff's work. I hope this episode brought a little something positive to your day. Thanks again for listening.